Hello again, friends. Welcome back for another video. In this video, you're going to see me attempt to make some holiday themed router trays. Now, every year for the last couple of years, I've been asked to make something to donate to my local women's club silent auction fundraiser, and I thought this year I would take a stab at making some of these festive router trays using some of my leftover scrap wood. So, without further ado, let's get into the build. Okay guys, so in order to make these router trays, I'm going to need some sort of template to use as my guide. Now, there are lots of different options and designs for making these types of trays. I decided to pick a couple easy holiday themed designs, and I just Googled some images and used my printer to print out some poster size images that I taped together. Now, I'm choosing to make my own template here, but if you wanted to skip this step, then there are a lot of different people that sell some pretty cool router templates. I'll link some of my favorites below for you to check out. Next up, I needed to get this paper template attached to some plywood. I just took some 1/4-inch plywood and applied some blue painter's tape to it. Now, this is a little trick that I had to learn the hard way. You see, this paper template is going to get attached to the plywood using some spray adhesive. And when it comes time to remove the paper template from the plywood, well, that blue painter's tape makes that step so much easier. Otherwise, you have to try and sand all of that paper and glue off, and trust me, it's a nightmare. Next, I cut out the template using my scroll saw. I started by cutting away most of the excess plywood first, and then I carefully cut along the outside edge of my paper template. Once I had the outside shape cut out, I drilled some holes on the inside of my template border, and then I just got to work on cutting out the interior space as well. Just like that, I now have a festive router template to use for the next step. Now, is it perfect? Of course.
You sit on a throne of lies.
Okay, it's not perfect, but if perfection is what you're seeking, then I'd suggest purchasing one of those aforementioned CNC or laser router templates. This one will do just fine for me though. Since I've yet to reach expert level on the scroll saw, I had a little bit of cleaning up to do on my templates. They weren't bad. I mean, I could tell what they were supposed to be, so that was a good start. I wanted to see if I could really refine their shapes by doing some sanding. Now, this is where I really wish I had a spindle sander, because that would probably be the best tool for this type of sanding job. Alas, I don't own one of those, but I did order some spindle sander attachments for my drill press, which inconveniently didn't show up in time. So I resorted to doing the only thing I knew to do in this situation: sand these templates by hand. I mean, that's what people would have done in the whole pre-power tool days, so if they could do it, then by golly, so can I. And when all that hand sanding just about broke me, the foreman stepped in to offer some encouragement to help me power through. With my templates done, I worked on gluing together some walnut and cherry boards that I milled for my router trays. Now, this is where you can get creative with the designs by using different style woods. I went with a pretty basic design here just because I was trying to use some scrap wood that I had left over from other projects. Now, for this particular glue up, I'm using Type Bond 3 here because it's water resistant. I want these trays to hold up in case they ever end up getting washed. Now that my glued up boards were dry, I placed my template on it and lined it up exactly how I wanted it, and then I just held it down tight while I traced the outline with the pencil. I'll use this traced outline to roughly cut out my shape on the bandsaw. With my shape roughly cut out, it was time to remove the material from the inside of my traced outline. Now, there are a couple different ways that you can remove this material, but I decided to hog out most of the material over at the drill press using different size Forstner bits. To get started, I first needed to install the bit and set it to the correct depth of cut. Now, I made sure to use the tip of the Forstner bit as my guide, and I just placed a couple of shims on my drill press table to set the depth of cut. Setting the depth using these shims should leave me a little over 1/4 of an inch of material on the bottom of my router trays. Once I had my depth set, I just went to town and let the sawdust fly, and I removed tons and tons of material. Spoiler alert, this makes a huge mess. In fact, this whole project makes a huge mess, so if you're gonna tackle it, just be prepared for some cleanup. Anyways, I started with a smaller Forstner bit for around the edges, and then I upgraded to a 2-inch bit for removing most of the material, making sure to set the depth of cut between each bit. You want to get as close to your outline as possible so that you don't have to remove as much with the router. After all of that drilling, you can see that I'm starting to get closer to what these trays are supposed to look like, but I still have a lot of refining to do yet, and that's going to get taken care of in the next step using my plunge router. Now, surely you guys remember that perfectly imperfect router template I made in the beginning of this video, right? Well, it's time to put it to work. I need to get it attached to my piece, and in order to do that, I'm going to be using some woodworking tape. I definitely wasn't shy about adding tape to this thing because I wanted to make sure it's not going to move on me when routing. Once I had enough tape on my template, I just lined it up with those lines I traced earlier and stuck it down. Now I can just run my router along this template. Actually, no, I can't. The router would be way too unsteady in its current state, so I'm going to have to create a bigger base for it. To do this, I picked up some sheets of acrylic that I plan to attach to the base of my router. Now, I actually end up having to tape 2 pieces together to get the thickness I needed for my size screws. Then I just drilled out some holes for those screws and attached it to my router base plate. This will make routing out the trays much safer. To remove the rest of the material from the trays, I installed a flush straight bit that has a ball bearing on the top. I'll run that ball bearing along my template to match the shape first. But before I can do that, I need to secure the tray to my work surface using some more of that double-sided tape. I also added some paste wax to my template to make sure that my acrylic base slides easily as I'm removing material. To get started, I line up my ball bearing so that it will run along the template as I route. Now, this is where I was sort of kicking myself for not making my template out of a material that was a little thicker. It would have just made this step a little easier because I would have had more to work with. I managed to make it work though, and I just started by routing out my shape first and then kept the router moving all over the piece to keep removing material. I tried to just take a little off at a time, and then I would set my router a little deeper to make another pass. Once I almost had all of those holes from the Forstner bit fully removed, I then switched over to a bowl and tray router bit to do a final pass. Now that all of the inside material had been removed, it was time to get these trays to their final shape. To do that, I needed to run the router along my template on the outside. I'll be using a different bit for this step, which has the ball bearing on the bottom instead, so I need to flip my piece over for this step. To secure it to the table, I just used some scrap 2x4s and taped them to my work table. Now, if I could do it again, I would probably cut these down into smaller blocks, but ultimately, they got the job done. With my piece secured to the table, I set that ball bearing along my template, which was now on the bottom, and I just ran my router along it to flush everything up. Now I can finally remove my template carefully so that I can use this thing again next year. Next, I took my palm router with a 1/4 inch roundover bit and I gave all of the edges a nice roundover. Now, as much as I was dreading this next step, it had to be done, and that was sanding these trays. Now, these were pretty tough to sand because of the weird shape, so I spent a lot of time hand sanding here again, grit after grit. Alright, let's get some finish on these trays. To finish these things off, I applied some Total Boat wood honey to them. I applied a generous amount of this stuff and let it soak in for about 20 minutes before coming back and wiping away the excess. I'd say this little scrap wood project turned out pretty cool, huh? There's so many possibilities when it comes to these router trays in terms of just overall design or what you want them to hold, which I think is pretty cool. I can see myself making more of these things in the future. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, let me know. I hope it inspired you to build something like this for yourself or maybe for someone else. After all, it is the season of giving. Merry Christmas and happy holidays to all of you. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.